The napkin on my lap was cloth, not paper. That was the first thing I noticed, because when my mother-in-law leaned across the table and said, "Honestly, sweetheart, who did you have to flatter to get that title?" my first instinct was to grip something, and all I had was that napkin. My sister-in-law laughed into her wine glass. My brother-in-law's wife studied her bread plate like it had suddenly become fascinating. And my husband reached for the salt shaker. Nobody said anything. I'd been married to Owen for 4 years at that point. 4 years of Sunday dinners at his parents' house in Naperville. 4 years of his mother's backhanded questions and his father's pointed silences. 4 years of learning that in this family, what goes unsaid is usually the cruelest part. I knew the playbook by now. I just hadn't expected them to run it the same night I told them I'd been promoted to Director of Strategic Finance at Aldercroft Consulting. I set down my fork. I picked up my wine. I smiled the smile I'd learned to keep in my back pocket for exactly these moments. The one that doesn't reach my eyes but doesn't give them anything to work with either. I earned it, I said. The same way I earned the last one. My mother-in-law made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite agreement. Something in between, like she was conceding a point she found distasteful. Owen passed the green beans to his father. I had been at Aldercroft for 6 years. I started as a junior analyst straight out of Northwestern with a finance degree and more student loans than I want to say out loud. I worked the kind of hours that make your eyes blur at traffic lights. I took on projects nobody else wanted, stayed late when everyone else left, and built a reputation for catching things others missed. Numbers mostly. Discrepancies. Small errors that looked innocent until you lined them up and saw the shape of something intentional underneath. That skill was what got me noticed. It was also what eventually broke my marriage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Owen and I met at a friend's birthday party in Wicker Park. He was easy to talk to. Funny in a dry, quiet way, and he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. I fell for him the way you fall for someone when you're 29 and tired of being alone fast and without enough caution. We dated for a year, got engaged, got married in a vineyard in the Galena countryside with 40 people and a string quartet. It was a good day. I want to be honest about that. There were genuinely good days. What I didn't understand until much later was that Owen loved me the way his family had taught him to love things. Quietly, conditionally, and always slightly tilted toward what was convenient. His mother, Vera, was the kind of woman who ran a household like a corporation and expected gratitude for the management. She had strong opinions about everything. The right neighborhood to live in. The right way to host a dinner party. The acceptable level of ambition for a daughter-in-law. That last one was the problem. Because in Vera's framework, I was always one rung too ambitious, one promotion too proud, one degree too convinced of my own worth. She never said it that plainly, of course. She was far too refined for plain speech. Instead, she asked questions. Do you really think the commute is sustainable long-term? When I took a job in the Loop, it's wonderful that you're so focused on your career. Owen mentioned you've been skipping the gym. When I started working weekends on a big account, how do they even measure performance in your field? It seems so subjective when I got my first bonus. And then, at the dinner table the night I announced my promotion to director, who did you have to flatter to get that title? I drove home that night, watching Owen's profile in the passenger seat, waiting for him to say something. He didn't. He turned on the radio. Some sports talk show. I kept my hands on the wheel and my mouth shut because I had learned, after 4 years, that pushing Owen to have a conversation he didn't want to have was like pushing on a wall. Nothing moved. You just bruised your hands. What I didn't know that night, what I wouldn't know for another 3 months, was that Owen's nephew, Colt, had just submitted his Q3 expense reports to our company's financial review queue. I need to explain how that's relevant. Aldercroft had a policy where certain expense submissions over a threshold amount went through a cross-departmental compliance review. It was a fairly standard internal audit function, 3 reviewers, rotating assignments, sign-off required before reimbursement processed. I'd been on the rotation before. Most of the submissions were boring, Client dinners, flights, hotel stays, standard business miles, the kind of thing you skim and approve. Colt had joined Aldercroft's business development team about 8 months before my promotion. Owen's sister's son, 27, fresh from a middling MBA program in Indiana, hired through a process that, as far as I could tell, had involved a phone call between his mother and someone on the hiring committee. He was friendly enough in a surface-level way, always with a name he'd just dropped, always with a story about a deal he was almost closing. I didn't dislike him. I didn't think about him much at all, until his file landed in my review queue on a Tuesday morning in October. I almost flagged it immediately for reassignment. Reviewing a family member's expense reports, even a family member by marriage, was the kind of thing that created headaches. But technically, the policy only excluded direct relatives, and Colt was my husband's nephew, which put him in a gray area I could have argued either way. I told myself I'd do a quick preliminary scan and hand it off if anything looked complicated. The first 3 pages were unremarkable. Client dinners in Chicago, a flight to Dallas for a conference, ground transportation, standard. Then I got to page 4. There was a hotel charge. The Palmer House in Chicago, 2 nights, $487 total. The dates were October 4th and 5th. I cross-referenced his approved travel calendar. According to the system, Colt had submitted working hours for October 4th and 5th as in-office days. Full 8-hour logs, not remote. Not partial. In office. I set down my coffee. I went back through the prior quarter. There was a flight charge to Nashville booked through the company portal dated July 18th, but his approved client roster showed no Nashville accounts, no travel authorization on file, no meeting summary submitted afterward, which was required for any client-related travel over $200. I told myself there could be explanations. Rebooked trips, miscoded dates. Data entry errors happen. I've caught plenty of those over the years, and most of them are exactly what they look like. Mistakes, not malice. But then I found the client dinner receipts, 4 of them across 6 weeks at restaurants in River North and the West Loop. Total, $3,840. The client listed on 3 of the 4 submissions was a company called Hartfield Partners. I searched our CRM. Hartfield Partners did not appear as an active prospect, a past client, or even a cold lead in our database. I searched the company name externally. Hartfield Partners LLC had been registered in Illinois 11 months ago. Its registered agent was an address in Naperville that I recognized as belonging to Owen's college roommate. I sat very still for a long time. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. I saved copies of everything I'd found, the hotel receipts, the Nashville flight, the 4 client dinners with the non-existing client, the LLC registration documents I'd pulled from the state database. I saved it all, and then I sat there looking at it, and I thought about Owen reaching for the salt shaker. Here's what I want to be honest about. I did not report it that day. I know that's the ethically cleanest move. And I know some people reading this would have done exactly that, walked the file down to compliance, handed it to someone, washed their hands of it. I've thought about that choice a lot in the months since. I don't think I was wrong to wait, but I understand why someone might disagree. What I told myself was that I needed more. 1 quarter of irregular expenses could be explained. 2 quarters couldn't. I kept the folder. I continued the review. I flagged the submission as requiring additional documentation and noted that I was waiting on supporting materials from the submitting employee before I could complete sign-off. That bought time without triggering an investigation I couldn't yet substantiate. It also meant I had to keep sitting across from Colt at Owen's parents' holiday dinner 6 weeks later. Vera had done the table in her usual way. White linens, candles, the good china. Owen's father sat at the head, quiet as always, letting Vera run the room. Owen's sister was there with her husband. Colt was there, telling a story about a deal he was nearly closing with a tech firm in Denver. He talked with his hands. He was charming in the way that certain men learn to be charming, smooth surface, no depth. The kind of charm that stops working the moment you stop smiling at it. At some point during dessert, Vera turned to me and asked how the transition into my new role was going. "It's a lot of responsibility," I said. "More visibility into the whole organization, which is interesting." Colt reached for the coffee carafe and didn't look at me. I looked at him. He poured his coffee and turned to his mother and said something about his Denver deal, and the moment passed. But I felt it. The half second where he'd paused before reaching for that carafe. The almost hesitation. Maybe I'm projecting. But I don't think I am. The second quarter of Colt's expenses arrived in the review queue in January. I requested the full file this time, including prior quarter records. I spent 2 evenings going through everything carefully, at home on my personal laptop with the door closed. By the end of the second evening, I had a picture that was difficult to look at. Over the course of 8 months, Colt had submitted reimbursement claims totaling approximately $23,400. Of that, I could identify roughly $14,800 that was either attached to a non-existent client, mismatched against logged office hours, or missing required authorization entirely. The Hartfield Partners dinners continued, 9 of them now, totaling just over $6,000. The LLC's registered agent had changed, but the new address was a mail forwarding service near Evanston. I found one email chain through a shared project folder I had access to for a different reason, where Colt referenced the usual arrangement to an address I didn't recognize. I didn't sleep well that week. What I kept coming back to was Owen, not whether he was involved. I genuinely didn't know that yet. What I kept coming back to was the question of what he would do if I told him. Would he come to me first? Would he go to Colt? Would he call his mother? I already knew the answer. I knew it the night he reached for the salt shaker. The company's annual Leadership Recognition Gala was held every February at the Marriott on Michigan Avenue. It was the kind of event that existed partly to celebrate people and partly to remind everyone how the company saw itself. Black tie optional, open bar, speeches by the senior partners. I had attended the last 3 years in a progressively more uncomfortable way as my own profile at the firm arose and my marriage contracted around me. This year, I had been asked to present one of the Regional Achievement Awards. It was a significant thing. The kind of thing that 8 months earlier, Vera would have made a sideways comment about. What I did not know, until 2 weeks before the gala, was that the firm's chief compliance officer had opened an internal investigation into expense reporting irregularities in the business development division. I found out because she called me directly. Her name was Rosalind. She was not someone who called to make small talk. She had been with Aldercroft for 11 years, had a corner office on the 32nd floor, and was known internally for being the person who ended 3 people's careers in a single quarter in 2019 without raising her voice once. When her name appeared on my phone at 2047 on a Thursday afternoon, I answered on the first ring. She said she'd received information suggesting I had flagged several expense submissions without escalating. She wanted to understand my process. She did not sound accusatory. She sounded like someone who had already formed a view and was now gathering confirmation. I told her I had flagged the submissions as pending documentation. I told her I had been building a complete picture before escalating to avoid a premature report that could be disputed on procedural grounds. I told her I had documentation I was prepared to share. There was a pause. She said, "Can you come to my office Thursday morning?" I said yes. I spent that evening organizing the folder I'd been building for months. Everything in chronological order, clear file names. A 1-page summary I'd written for myself that laid out the pattern plainly. I printed a hard copy and put it in a manila envelope. I brought both the digital file on a USB and the printed envelope. Rosalind listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at the documents for a long time. Then she asked me 3 specific questions about the hotel charge discrepancies. I answered them. She nodded after each one. She said she would need to take it from there. She also said, carefully, that she wanted to note that the review assignment had created a conflict of interest given the family relationship, and that going forward, such assignments should be flagged at intake. She was not unkind about it. But she said it. I said I understood. I drove home thinking about that. About whether I'd made the right calls. About what the right call even looks like when every option has a cost. Owen was in the kitchen when I got home. He was making pasta, something he did when he'd had a long day, because it was mechanical and it calmed him. He asked how my day was. I said it was fine. I sat at the kitchen island and watched him drain the noodles and thought about all the things I was not saying. 2 days before the gala, Owen came home looking like he'd been carrying something heavy in his chest all afternoon. He sat on the edge of the couch without taking off his coat. He said Colt had called him. I waited. He said Colt had told him there was an investigation, that someone in compliance had his files. He said Colt was scared and his mother was upset and they were trying to understand how it had gotten to this point. He looked at me then. He didn't ask me directly. I want to be clear about that. He didn't say, "Did you report my nephew?" He just looked at me with this particular expression. Not anger, exactly, but something that had collapsed inward and waited. I said, "I found serious irregularities in an expense review. I documented them and shared them with compliance. That's my job." He said, "He's family." I said, "He was billing the company for dinners with a company he made up." Owen looked away. He slept in the guest room that night. The next morning, he was gone before I was up. The gala was on a Saturday. I had my dress pressed, my award remarks prepared. I got ready alone in our bathroom with the door open because there was no reason to close it anymore. The ballroom at the Marriott was done in the way these things are always done, round tables with centerpieces, soft lighting, the hum of 200 people doing the social math of a professional event. I found my seat, said hello to colleagues, drank half a glass of champagne and switched to sparkling water because I wanted to be clear-headed. I was not expecting Owen's family to be there, but Vera had apparently been invited as a guest of the business development team, some end-of-year client appreciation category that I had not been involved in coordinating. She was at a table near the back with Owen's sister and her husband. Colt was not there, but Vera was, in a silver dress, talking to the man next to her with the particular composure of someone who has not yet learned that the floor is about to open. The speeches started. Awards were given. I presented the Regional Achievement Award to a colleague from the Denver office who had genuinely earned it, and I did it without my voice shaking, which I considered a personal accomplishment. Then Rosalind stood up. She was not on the printed program. I saw two of the senior partners exchange a look. She thanked the assembled guests briefly. Then she said that Aldercroft's commitment to integrity was not an abstract value but a daily practice, and that this year the compliance team had completed a significant internal review that had resulted in several personnel actions. She named no names. She said only that the review had been initiated by thorough and professional documentation from a member of the finance team, and that this kind of work, quiet, careful, unglamorous, was precisely what protected the firm's reputation and its clients. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Half the room already knew, in the way that people at these events always know the things that have been swirling in the hallways for weeks. The other half would know by Monday morning. I looked at my water glass. I kept my face neutral. But somewhere underneath the neutral face, I felt something loosen, something I'd been holding tight for a very long time. After the program ended, I was standing near the bar waiting for my coat check when Vera appeared beside me. I had wondered what this moment would look like. I played several versions of it in my head. What happened was that she stood next to me in silence for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You didn't have to do it the way you did it." I turned to look at her. She looked older than she had at dinner in the fall, or maybe just smaller. "He's 27, she said. "He made mistakes." I thought about $14,800. I thought about a fake LLC registered in Naperville. I thought about 9 dinners billed to a company that didn't exist. "I know how old he is," I said. "I also know what I found." She looked at me for a moment longer, then walked away. I got my coat. I took the elevator down to the lobby. Outside, Michigan Avenue was cold in the particular way it gets in February. In Chicago, the kind of cold that has texture, that gets into your collar and the corners of your eyes. I stood on the sidewalk and called a car and waited. Owen called me while I was waiting. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. I listened to it later that night, sitting on the edge of the bed with my coat still on. He said he needed time. He said he loved me, but that he felt like I'd chosen the company over his family. He said he wasn't sure where that left things. I listened to it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the nightstand. What I thought about instead of calling him back was a conversation I'd had with Rosalind at the end of our Thursday meeting, after the documents were exchanged and the questions were answered. She'd walk me to the elevator. She said, "You handled this professionally. That matters here." It was a small thing, 8 words, but I had been carrying so many moments where my professional judgment was treated as something to be tolerated rather than respected, that 8 words of plain acknowledgement felt like more than they probably should have. I did not call Owen back that night. We had the conversation he needed to have over several difficult weeks after that. We tried, in the way that people who are essentially good, but fundamentally mismatched, try with honesty and without much hope. The marriage had been straining for longer than the investigation. I think we both knew that. The investigation just made us stop pretending otherwise. The divorce was filed in April. It was not dramatic. We divided things fairly. I kept the apartment because my name was on the lease first. He moved to a place in Logan Square. We were not cruel to each other. That's something I'm glad of. Colt resigned from Aldercroft before the formal termination process was completed. The expense irregularities were turned over to the company's legal team. I don't know what came of that on the legal side because it moved into channels I wasn't part of. Owen's sister called me once in March. I didn't answer. She didn't leave a message. I got a small promotion in June. Not a big one, a title adjustment that came with a modest salary increase and a change in reporting structure that put me closer to the partners. Rosalind sent me an email that said only, "Well deserved." I printed it and put it in the folder where I keep things I want to remember. My mother called me the week the divorce was finalized. She asked me if I was okay. I said I was, and I meant it. Not in the way you say things are fine when they aren't, but in the way you say them when you've gotten through something that was genuinely hard and you're still standing on the other side of it. She asked if I had any regrets. I thought about the napkin in my lap, the white tablecloth, Owen reaching for the salt shaker, the folder I'd been building for months on a laptop with the door closed. Rosalind's 8 words in the elevator. I said, "Not the ones you'd think." There are days I still drive past Owen's parents' neighborhood on my way to a client meeting, and I think about those Sunday dinners, the good china, the candles, the questions that were never really questions. I think about how long I tried to make myself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of what I should be. I think about the night I got promoted and sat at that table with a cloth napkin I gripped so hard it wrinkled and said nothing. I don't grip so hard it wrinkled and said nothing. I don't have to.